So this video is going to serve as a more in-depth breakdown of chapter 265 of Jujutsu Kaisen, which includes nothing more than a conversation between Yuji and Sukuna. While not much seems to be happening at first, there is a lot going on within this chapter, and I hope this video helps you and others understand that. With that said, since I value the time of both you and I'm not going to waste any more time with the intro, and we can just get straight into the video. So this talk begins with Sukuna explaining that when you're in the middle of combat with another sorcerer, it's rare, but you might directly connect with them and enter a world such as the one he and Yuji are communicating in. He explains that when this happens, it's a side effect of that connection with others, as cursed energy as a whole is completely rooted in human emotion. And with this explanation, we can actually understand why Yuji and Sukuna entered these alternative worlds where they would speak to their opponents and either send them off or make them become friends, all that extra stuff. And if you notice how Yuji and Sukuna's characters are, it actually falls in line with how the worlds work. Sukuna understands his role as the strongest, thus he usually uses these alternative worlds to give his opponent some sense of closure, understanding of their strength, and send them off. Yuji, on the other hand, values friendships, relationships with all his heart, and wants to protect the people that he cares for. Although Yuji did not really know Choso, Todo, etc., he still wants to protect and care for people, and these alternative worlds that he puts Todo and Choso in kind of reflect that. It always shows him doing something good for the two, And interestingly enough, as we'll see through this entire talk, Yuji tries to do something good for Sukuna here, but Sukuna is like none other. He can't be saved. But let's continue. This only reinforces how deep Jujutsu Kaisen's power system can go, but Sukuna pushes this suggestion aside and asks if this is Yuji's domain expansion. Yuji says that he was desperate and has no idea what this is, but he instead redirects the conversation to just asking Sukuna to hang out with him and spend some time talking, and this is where we get into the deep stuff. Yuji and Sukuna both begin their walk with Yuji showing the Demon Sword Dance statue. Sukuna says that he's unaware of the statue and its significance, with Yuji basically saying, yeah, only locals really know about it anyway. Yuji then gives us a bit of history on himself at last. 265 chapters of knowing almost nothing of Yuji's life before he would become a sorcerer, and we finally get some answers on this, but pay close attention to his life, as I believe there's a very profound lesson to get out of this. He speaks about how he was born in Sendai, then had to live in Iwate until he was about 6 or 7 due to his grandfather's job, and then would have to come back to Sendai later on. And not too long ago, he revisited Iwate for a funeral of the friend of his grandfather. When he revisited, he was surprised by how much had changed about the city, but deep down inside, he wasn't really too surprised. He expected things to be the way they are now, the ghost town it is as of today. He then wonders if his grandfather's friend would have visited his grandfather had he passed away first. A very human thought to have. It's a simple but irrelevant detail. Like us all, we all sometimes ponder things such as this, especially when looking back at the past. Sukuna here has nothing to offer to the conversation, for good or bad reason depending on how you perceive Sukuna as a character. He's a beast, freak of nature, a deviant. Such a human experience means nothing to him, and his silence is in line with what we know of him. Yuji would then show where he played as a child, recounting many of his experiences here, but eventually he ends up showing Sukuna what he considers to be a morning glory. The symbolism behind such a flower stands to remind those who see it to embrace every single day of their lives with the utmost gratitude. But Sukuna would correct him, saying that these flowers are Ajisai flowers, calling Yuji a moron for mistaking the two. In Japanese culture specifically, Ajisai represents heartfelt emotion and also a fickle or changeable heart. To get into Yuji and Sukuna alongside these flowers, I believe Yuji making the careless mistake of misidentifying the flower as a morning glory is a representation of how he views the world himself. Yuji is someone who has always been extremely grateful for not only his life, but life as a whole, and it takes Sukuna possessing his body and eradicating thousands in it in order to shake up the love he has for himself. But even when he was on the thought process of sacrificing himself to defeat Sukuna, Yuji would only consider this thought because it allowed him to save more lives in the end. Sukuna's observation of the flower being one that resembles a deep emotion or changeable heart could potentially refer to something that's happened in his past, or the fact that he's placed in this inner domain alongside Yuji, who's currently making the attempt to talk some sense into him. Yuji, however, is interested and surprised in Sukuna's knowledge of flowers. He wonders why Sukuna would know anything about them in the first place, and Sukuna responds, saying that his knowledge comes from Megumi's memories. Yuji says if this is the case, then you should remember this area from when you were in my body, right? Sukuna then says that he doesn't look at every single memory. This moment only makes you wonder about Sukuna's choice to remember the Ajisai flowers. Yuji and Sukuna now move on to a park. Yuji speaks about how there's crawfish and he prompts Sukuna to join him in catching some. Sukuna accepts, but with not much excitement. They both end up catching one, but Sukuna manages to catch an American crawfish while Yuji catches a Japanese crawfish. The American ones are larger than the Japanese ones, but the Japanese crawfish are more rare overall, so the two argue over which is better. They're the same, but the two crawfish are valued for completely different reasons. You can interpret this comparison in many different ways. Like the crawfish, Yuji and Sukuna have ridiculously strong exteriors. They're freaks of nature that can withstand any punishment that comes their way. But they're different in morals and values, and their clash of values is displayed through the two crawfish, with the two characters arguing which one they think is better because Sukuna values the size of the crawfish, whereas Yuji values the rarity of the crawfish. This argument displays that Yuji and Sukuna can see what is the same thing with two different perspectives. And to further go on about these crawfish, which I'm sure you guys are sick of, the American crawfish is an invasive species in Japan, and it's illegal to have them there. It reminds me of Sukuna's fingers and how he just gets in people's bodies and possesses them. He does everything wrong, and Sukuna is in a time where he should not exist. It's like a cool metaphor, I guess. Yuji and Sukuna now arrive at a department store that moved into Iwate and eliminated all of the local shops because it just performed that well. He says it's unfortunate, but since it brought a movie theater alongside it, it makes up for what its presence has caused. I think this is Yuji just talking honestly, but if I had to overanalyze this, I would say that the department store is a metaphor of Yuji's introduction to the world of Jujutsu. It came in, eliminated really every other part of Yuji's life, and while that is a shame to him, Jujutsu Society has provided him more than just a normal life, allowing him to pursue a purpose that transcends even himself. As Yuji and Sukuna continue, he mentions that the countryside appears mostly gray, but if you head farther from the city, there will be more greenery, so don't worry. Sukuna says that he wasn't expecting anything from the very beginning. Again, none of this matters to him. Yuji once again prompts Sukuna to enjoy the scenery, mentioning that as a child, he used to catch locusts as much as he could in the rice fields, but now he no longer sees them here. Locusts are usually seen as a bad omen or a plague in different cultures, and if you remember, Yuji exorcised the locust curse during the Shibuya incident, and I'm sure this moment references that. Gege could be implying that your actions do affect the world around you with this subtle text bubble, and although this is a dream world, the point still stands. After hearing this, Sukuna interrupts, wanting Yuji to end this conversation. However, Yuji just tells him to hold on a second as he wants to continue walking and talking. So what's going on here is that Sukuna has been checked out the entire time and just wants Yuji to get to the point. Yuji, however, wants to keep speaking to Sukuna and sharing these experiences with him to hopefully get anything out of him. We will see what this leads up to, but I think it's important to note that this, from my perspective, is like a metaphor as to what makes life, life. These little things we've experienced are what makes life important, and they're all a part of our story no matter how much we value them. Yuji seems to understand this. The two stop by some horses, and Yuji speaks about how his grandfather used to bring him to this farm often when he was a child, and looking back, he was taking on the role of a parent since Yuji had none. Yuji and Sukuna then engage in archery together. Sukuna lands a bullseye, and Yuji's surprised at Sukuna's marksmanship. Sukuna basically says that yeah, of course I'm better than you. And Yuji's like, oh yeah, because Sukuna comes from the Heian era, where archery was prevalent and even essential. Something I like about this chapter is that Sukuna only engages with any activity that is competitive, one where you can come out as a winner, and even then, he feels nothing while partaking in these activities. Yuji and Sukuna then enter Yuji's past during a heavy winter. He'd speak about how it doesn't feel like winter if snow doesn't pile up, and that he'd love drinking milk tea after shoveling snow during these heavy winter mornings. He once believed that Santa was real due to hearing chimes at night, but would come to see that in truth, it was chains attached to a car making all that noise. The human experience. The two then arrive at Kitakami Tenshochi Park. Here, they're surrounded by tons of cherry blossoms. The cherry blossom is known for its short lifespan. as when this tree begins to flower, its bloom will only last a week before falling to the ground and being carried off by the breeze. In Japanese culture, these flowers embody the duality of life and death, reinforcing the fleeting nature of existence. A fitting stage for these two characters, and once arriving in this setting, Sukuna would state that he's had enough already, with Yuji saying, "Okay, fine, I've shown what I wanted to show anyway." And even after Yuji has displayed quite the normal life, Sukuna refers to it as a hideous mess and asks Yuji to get to the point already. And Yuji obliges. As Yuji begins to think of all those dear to him who have passed, he speaks about how he once believed that understanding and fulfilling your role was the meaning of life, and if you managed to accomplish this, you had a proper death. But now that's changed. Roles in life like being someone who walks dogs or exterminates curses does not matter. Even if there weren't any roles you did nothing with your life is disconnected from everyone else and it leaves nothing behind. It doesn't matter. Even if there are tiny fragments of memories resembling yourself within yourself or another, your life still holds the value beyond the memories that create their own identity. It's not about how someone dies, and whoever believes this value doesn't exist cannot be forgiven. Yuji states that he absolutely despises Sukuna. People are not tools, and thus they aren't born with predetermined roles. In the end, you can never tell who's truly a good or bad guy. Humans are simply way more complex than that. I don't think this moment Yuji has is important to only the context of the story and how his self-worth has grown immensely, but it's important for readers to understand this lesson as well. Innate human value in every single experience, even the most simple of them all, are meaningful and deserving of acknowledgement. In this world, not everyone gets the same opportunities to fight for something bigger than them, be born with certain talents, healthy, or to even be born as a good person. But something we all have in common is that we as humans have the privilege of existing and experiencing this amazing yet heartbreaking life. Yuji goes on to say that he may be the one who's wrong, so he at least wanted Sukuna to see and understand what he's saying about the people other than Sukuna himself, that he can't see the value in. And Yuji does this because Sukuna only sees value in himself, and Yuji was making an attempt at changing that. And a lot of people had a problem with this because it's Sukuna, why would you save Sukuna? Yuji's always been someone who's wanted to save and help people. That's the curse his grandfather has given him, and that even applies to Sukuna, sadly. Remember though, he went into this conversation knowing that Sukuna couldn't be helped. But deep down inside in his soul, he knew that he at least had to try before making the final decision to exorcise Sukuna for good. Sukuna simply says, "I don't feel anything and I absolutely understand what you're getting at, but all of it means nothing to me." Here, Sukuna establishes that he cannot be helped. A talk no jutsu does not apply to him. And Sukuna is so far gone that he likens this feeling of his to Yuji's expectation of Iwate when he originally returned. He expected it and it can't be helped. That's just how things are, and so what? Yuji accepts that Sukuna cannot be helped and says that it's truly pointless, and Sukuna responds, saying that he's stunned by Yuji's cowardice. As for his hatred or anger for him, is this entire talk all he had to show for it? But Sukuna makes a realization. He comes to understand the true dynamic of this conversation. Yuji does not hate Sukuna whatsoever, because you cannot feel hatred for someone beneath you. At this moment, Yuji has come to feel absolute pity for the existence of Sukuna. This monstrosity without the ability to enjoy empathy or love one another. Sukuna then goes on to ask if Yuji was trying to offer him kindness, and during this moment, they're shown at the Otokoyama Hill, which is what the Kitakami Park leads up to. Like the chapter itself, this park contains the same Buddha statue, a statue that was built with the hope that people could eventually obtain eternal peace and happiness. This is where the speech in Yuji's exploration of life come to an end. In response to Sukuna's previous question, Yuji states that Sukuna was absolutely correct, and that he has the ability to end his life. Yuji makes a proclamation that Sukuna is to release Megami and return to him, and he will spare his life. If you cannot salvage the evil, then you must completely and utterly eviscerate it. In response to the ultimatum that Yuji has given him, Sukuna grits his teeth in a ferocious rage like none other, stating that Yuji must have a huge misunderstanding. He will not stop at slicing him into bits. Right before his eyes, he will annihilate every single person he values in order to display that their so-called value is of no concern to him. And here, the talk comes to an end. If you notice, Sukuna has already lost the battle of ideals. All he can do in response to Yuji is go into a huge fit of anger and scream that he's gonna destroy everything Yuji loves like the plague he is. Meanwhile, Yuji is disciplining Sukuna and giving him a choice to be saved or extinguished, similar to Kshitigarbha, the Buddha that Yuji bears so much resemblance to. For those unaware, this specific bodhisattva is a reference to Yuji's mudra. He is an enlightened being who vows to empty all hells to save the sinners before achieving his own enlightenment to become a Buddha. He's also a guardian of children and children who have passed away early, sometimes even before being born. I did want to give this brief overview on Kshitigarbha, as understanding him is actually central to understanding Yuji's character and a lot of the things he does now. With his domain mudra also being the mudra of Kshitigarbha, I think that we can really start to see how Yuji's character has been inspired by this bodhisattva now and look at the series from a different angle, well, Yuji specifically. And I did make like this massive video that speaks about how all the characters played a role into this Kshitigarbha lore that Yuji resembles. Check it out here. Sukuna and Yuji have always been fundamentally opposites, and with Yuji being the character that Sukuna has always mocked, toyed with, and picked on for being weak, he expressed a calm frustration at the prospect that Yuji may be his equal, a person who can stand against everything Sukuna stands for while matching his strength is something that gets under his skin. But when Sukuna realizes that this person is not proclaiming to be the one who decides his fate, that calm exterior of his shatters. If you noticed, Sukuna only goes into fits of rage whenever Yuji does something that implies that he can eventually surpass Sukuna. And Yuji, serving as his Buddha-like figure in the chapter, works even better, because this speech can also be applied to Megumi, who's in desperate need of a mindset change in order to be saved. When it comes down to it, Yuji's chat with Sukuna in the chapter is supposed to display to the audience that Yuji has finally abandoned this clog mentality and has pivoted toward a mindset that reinforces the belief that there is no point in seeking this death that has meaning, because every death has meaning. And not only this, but so does every single life. No matter how you live, what you accomplish, what you provide, what you get to do or what you don't get to do, all life has value. I believe this is why Yuji's life was so simple in the first place. It isn't supposed to be grandiose or special as you would expect from the main character of a shonen manga. His life was just like anybody else's really, and anybody could be in the position he's in. Because truth is, the only reason he's come as far as he has is because of every single person who's been in his life, both good and bad, and each one of those people have their own innate value. Yuji in this chapter has finally learned to value his own life and live the best he can instead of focusing on a way to find a meaningful death. I think the best quote in this chapter is, even if you have spent your life with no connections and nothing remains of you, just the tiny fragments of memories that make up a person drifting elsewhere give value to a human life. All of his friends and family who are dear to him and have passed away have left memories within him. Memories of value that have come to help him understand the true value and beauty of life, more than likely preventing Yuji from going down a much worse path than he has today, preventing him from becoming anything like the beast that he must eradicate here and now. To conclude this video, I want to talk about one last thing, and it's the direction of the story that Gege very obviously had in mind. Specifically, with the mindset of a life being valued through the fragments of what they have left and done for the world and those around them. It's a vindicating message that Gege put into the story, because I for one had always argued that Yuki Sukuna was never a wasted character despite her lackluster death, and that a lot of her actions in the story are why the sorcerers were able to obtain their final chance to defeat Sukuna and Kenjaku. And it seems as if with this chapter reinforcing the belief that people live on through others through Yuji's enlightenment, Gege seems to have confirmed that this is the mindset that he's approached the cast with. So with that said, a lot of rereading may have to be done for all of us. Appreciate every moment you have with those that you love and treat them well. Peace out, guys.